In this video, we're going to take a look at applying custom textures. Here we have our crow and we've laid out the UVs for the entire model, and we can see them here, and we've arranged them into a nice order. Enough space in between each of those UV shells, and our UVs are human readable. We can tell that that's probably the head, those are probably the parts of the wing, and there's the body and the tail. Once I have that UV shell completed, we can then export this as an image and paint on it. So I'm going to go to Polygons and open up UV Snapshot at the very bottom of my polygon menu. So the first thing I want to do is establish the size of my UV snapshot. Now it's basically going to be the actual size of the image that I'm going to produce here, and that image that I'm going to be producing is what we see right inside of the 0 to 1 texture space. I want this to be a pretty good size. I'm going to make it 2048 by 2048. We only need to type that once. We have keep aspect ratio turned on, so it will keep my texture into a square. And the rest of those values are good. We want a white wireframe, and we're going to anti-alias those lines just so that it looks a little bit cleaner for us. The image format, we can use pretty much any image format here that we want. This is only going to be a template that we'll paint on, so I'm not too worried about the overall quality. I'm going to go ahead and just choose a JPEG. And then up at the top here, we want to make sure that we recognize where that directory is so we don't have to go hunt for it. It should be by default, if you're using your project directory, it should be placed into your images folder. And we're going to call this Crow UVs, and we're all set. Now, the other option we have down here is the UV range. Right now, it's set to normal, which is going to be my normalized texture space 0 to 1. But we can choose to use a specific range. Now, we would want to do this if we have a much larger model, perhaps something with a lot more detail, like a human character. And with a human character, we might want to use a 2048 by 2048 texture map for each of the parts. So for instance, we might have a 2K image for the character's head, another 2K image for the character's body, another one for the legs, etc. That way we can maximize our textures and really get some great detail in there. That's going to be far more efficient than if we were just to say, hey, let's just make this massive 20K by 20K texture. We'd much rather break those down into smaller textures just because they're going to be far more manageable. And our software likes it better too. Maya would rather load 10 2K textures than one 20,000K texture. Now that range, that would allow us to grab UVs that are over here or over here. So I could have my face UVs of my higher res character here, the legs here, the arms down here, etc. And we could then grab that UV range. Now, as far as Maya is concerned, it doesn't matter if the UVs are here, or even out into this space over here. As long as they always fit within some kind of 0 to 1 block, whether it's positive or negative or sitting out here, which is actually going to be a 2 by 2 in this area. As long as it's still within that type of block, that square block, Maya will read any texture that we place, and those UVs will pick it up. So where the UVs are located is not going to be critical. All right, our settings are all good. We'll hit OK, and we already have that file out there. And let's check and see what it saved. Here's my Crow UVs. I'm in my project directory. There's my UV layout. Now I can take this UV layout and bring it into a software package like Photoshop, and then set up a couple of layers and just start painting directly on this. When I do it, I want to make sure that I'm painting within these UV shells. The extra wireframe that I have there is just as a guide. That's just going to help me align my texture a little bit better to any type of detail that I might have on my model. So I've already painted a texture here, sourced some photos as well, just to get a real quick and dirty texture that we can apply to our UV shell. Now notice each of the images here are placed within those UV shells. nothing overlapping. Let's go back over to Maya and we'll load that texture now. And let's clean up our model here. We still have that hard edge going down the middle. Just going to soften edges. And we'll delete our history. And let's call this guy Crow. And now let's assign a material to it. And I'm going to put an anisotropic material on here. And we'll go down and choose from our marking menu, Assign Favorite Material. Now, I don't have anisotropic here, but I'll just go ahead and throw a blend on it. And then in my attribute editor, click on blend, and then just choose anisotropic. And I'm choosing anisotropic just because I want this type of specular highlight. It's not going to be super critical for what we're doing here, but it'll give us a little bit more of a dimension on our character. All right, let's make sure that we're using Viewport 2.0, and now you can see that specular highlight. And let's load up our texture. Back over in the attribute editor, I'm going to go to my color channel, click on the checkerboard texture. That's going to bring up my Create Render Node options, and we want to choose File. That creates another node that's going to generate a file node, and we'll scroll down to where we have image name and choose the browser. And we'll go into our source images folder of our project directory, and we have our image right here. I'll choose that and choose Open. That will then apply that to our character. Now we don't see anything yet. I need to hit 6 on the keyboard, and now that texture will load up. And if we did our painting correctly, it's going to match our UV shells, and so that we don't have any gaps or openings in that texture. And our entire character has a painted texture on him. To make him look a little bit better, I'm going to go back to that anisotropic material, and let's scroll down, and let's add the same texture to the specular value. Click on that Create Render node. I'll choose File, and I'll load that same texture up. And now that specular is much nicer. Now it actually blends in because it's reading that texture map. So now it matches with our color map.